Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar on how to build a centralized training portal. And the biggest thing that we're talking about is how you're actually going to save your HR and operations staff hundreds of hours a year and a whole lot of money. We'll first take you through some of the things that you're probably experiencing, you may not even be thinking about. And as an owner or COO, those kind of roles, you may not be checking in with your HR department. And those kind of teams that aren't telling you that how many times they're repeating the same processes, and the issues that they may be going through with training, and just optimization in the whole onboarding process. My name's Nate Stockard. I'm president of Blue Atlas Marketing. Blue Atlas Marketing is coming up on 15 years of helping industrial manufacturing and B2B companies really bring in more business, maximize revenue, and ultimately grow their company. So let's dive right into what we're talking about today on how to build a centralized training portal. The real thing that we're talking about is standardizing onboarding, reducing a lot of manual work, and ensuring compliance. And I think ensuring compliance is that one area that a lot of people don't think about when it comes to training. When you train people, I all training across the board, what I've seen in a lot of companies kind of feels the same as they do like in restaurants. And I know people are like, oh, well, we're a major industrial company, but think about how a training happens in a restaurant. So corporate will train a server and teach them everything that they want them to know. But then after that training, the next server comes on board. They have that server train the next server. There's going to be a drop in from the corporate training to the first server to the second server. And you can imagine how every time the server trains the next server, there actually is just the whole training degrades, things get missed. And so from an industrial manufacturing company where there are compliance and safety issues and things like that, the same things happen. You train your first person. Well, now they're a supervisor, so they're going to do the training for the next one. When they do the training, they're going to train the way they've learned. Unfortunately, their bad habits are going to get picked up and trained to the next person. And then when that person becomes a supervisor, they're going to do the same. When you start to look several layers down, you're actually seeing that your training is missing a whole lot of information that you want as a company. You're missing a lot of things from a safety and regulation standpoint. So you're completely out of compliance. And so what we're talking about is really building something that can help with the entire process to, one, save time for your HR team and your ops teams, but also to really improve efficiency and help your company be more compliant, and do better with their regulations. So why training wastes so much time? And you probably already have an idea. If you're watching this webinar, you're already going, I think we could be doing this better. But let's talk through a couple of things that you may not be thinking about. One, onboarding new hires, it's the same task repeated over and over. From the very start, like, all right, fill out your paperwork. Once you fill that out, then we've got to get your direct deposit, all of those basic HR tasks. But then even once you go into your training for each position, it's the same task repeated over and over. And so you're wasting someone's time who has to go through and do that initial training. Your HR staff is tied up in low value admin tasks. They're doing things that really, you're not paying them their salary to do these manual low value tasks. They're doing them, but they can be doing more important tasks if you had this more in an automated or centralized portal. Two, you lose consistency in the process across various departments. In my example, we're talking about, you train one supervisor in one department, train another supervisor in another department, and then tell them to basically go train somebody else. There's no consistency because they don't typically have a flow and say, this is the job we got to get done. If you do it, then I've done my training. That's true, but there are going to be gaps in what they're actually doing in training, especially when you look at the safety and regulations. So compliance gaps come up that actually create a liability for your company. So do you want that liability on your hands because of the inconsistency with training? And we see that across the board in every type of company. That's why I gave you the example of, like, even in restaurants with servers, from something like that where you go, oh, well, that should be easy to train. It's not necessarily the easiest, but there's still going to be gaps there, all the way to somewhere, where safety is a high concern. You can have gaps in the regulations and what they know and how they're operating and those kind of things, which are going to create a liability for your work comp, general liability in your company as a whole. Now let's talk about cost. Manual training costs you every year year, at least hundreds of hours. We've looked at some and done audits on some companies, and we're literally talking about over quite a few employees, thousands of hours that are wasted doing the same thing over and over. You start to hire training departments, and there are multiple people, and you're spending a ton of money to be able to train your staff, spending a lot of hours to really waste somebody's time on low value tasks that could be done in a better way. You're going to create errors and inconsistency in the training delivery because people just forget or people get busy. If they don't have an outline or something like that, they're going to try to train the best of their ability, but they're probably going to drop the ball somewhere, and you're going to create errors and inconsistency. Then you're going to get higher turnover from unclear onboarding. People think, all right, we go through this interview process and we're looking for candidates, and kind of, as a company, we kind of look at it from a one side of, well, I need people to do my job and I'm going to find the best candidate. But it's a two-way street. When we do the onboarding, that's where we now got to move into the kind of the sales role. During the interview, the candidates are selling themselves to you. Once we hire them, the roles are reversed. We want to keep the candidate, and we want to make sure that they're happy and they're onboarded properly, and they understand the values of the company, and they understand the processes and what's expected of them. The problem is when that onboarding is basically a disaster, or it's confusing, or there's no process at all, you actually will see higher turnover. If you've said, well, I hired somebody and 4 weeks later they left, this is probably why. There was no onboarding process, and you want just to throw them in there and be like, hey, I hired you for this job. You said you could do it. Go do it. That is true. You hired them for a job. Their skill set and their experience says they can do it, but they don't know what they're doing for inside your company and how you want it done. And your onboarding needs to be there and be consistent every time. Then you're going to find the missed compliance steps that creates financial risk for your company. And because of those compliance and maybe safety regulations and things like that, you're creating a whole lot of problems for your employee that you're onboarding. You're creating problems for your supervisor. You're creating problems for any financial risk. And if you ever get an insurance audit, for instance, and it starts to, well, show me your onboarding process. The weaker that process is, the more liability you pose to that company. The hidden costs are going to add up quickly, both time and dollars. And the thing is, by putting in like a centralized training portal, you're saving a lot of people time. You're building consistency. There's really so many boxes that you get to check of why you would want to put something like this in place. So let's talk about that shift to a centralized training and the value that is there for you. One, you get to standardize your onboarding and compliance process. You're going to make sure everybody's compliant. Everybody understands the safety regulations. Everybody understands the things you have to do as a company. One, to deliver the product or service that you want to deliver. Two, to be compliant and follow all regulations. Next, you're going to reduce HR time by automating a lot of these repetitive tasks. Your HR team is going to look at you and go, this is amazing. Every time I hire a candidate, you have no idea how much I have to go through to get somebody on board, and I have to gather everything. And, it's such a time waster and everything else. You're going to say, this is amazing. I can get to the things that really matter, that I can help in the employee, process and everything that's involved. And so this is going to be a great opportunity for your HR team. And the thing is, it's accessible anywhere for remote facility workers. The great thing is, if you have people that are out in the field, you have people that are, working all over the world, you don't have to bring them in and go through the expense of flying them to corporate, for instance, and go through all of that process to hire them. Now, you may choose to still do that, but even then, you can still cut down on the time of somebody having to basically do the hand holding while they're inside, your corporate office. But you roll out a new training, you don't have to bring everybody in. You don't have to get everybody on a Zoom call and you deal with that kind of technology. With a proper centralized portal, you get the opportunity to provide new training and create accessibility for anybody, anywhere. You also get to track the employee's progress. Everybody's like, oh yeah, I went through that training. We can build into those portals, and there's all type of learning management systems and things like that allow you to track what the employees have done, what they've accomplished, how well they scored on quizzes. You can provide, some assessments in there for them to be able to prove their knowledge and that they watched the training. With the portal, you train once, then scale your training to everyone forever. You can keep that rolling, and you don't have to do it over again. And you're saving so much time by putting in a portal like this. So we'll take you through kind of the four-part training blueprint that if you're thinking about putting something like this in place, you really can take these four steps to your team, to your developers, to your IT groups and say, this is what we're trying to achieve. And this is the blueprint that we want to follow. And once we get done with this blueprint and show you kind of, what to do, I'll show you one in action, show you an example of what it can look like. So you can really have a visual idea how that works as well. First thing is content centralization. So you can store your standard operating procedures, your SOPs, your training docs, videos, company information, anything that you want to get to your entire team can be in this. You might have an HR system portal. A lot of HR teams will be like, we need Bamboo HR or Zoho, and things like that to do all of our HR. The thing is, they're not built to hold all of these things for your company. They're built to hold that the hiring and onboarding process, and that's about it. So with the centralized portal, that can be embedded in it, but then all of these other pieces that you need for your team are part of the process and in the centralized portal. Two, you build in user access. You don't want this just to open to anybody. This is company proprietary information. So you do want a safe and secure portal with user access, role-based logins. You've got your HR, your ops, your employees. You want the restrictions on who can see which content. And then you can monitor that based on each role so that you can set up training. So, for this particular role, I want to automatically put them into these particular roles. And so that's where the automation comes into play. You can assign modules and training and content based on the new hires, based on the compliance cycles that you're going through, and based on the things that each of those employees need. You've got somebody in a certain role and they get promoted. Well, as soon as they get promoted, then you immediately can go in and say, now that we've changed their status as this type of role, new training is automatically available. You can either manually set those up and say, these are the courses I want them to take. But if you build it in with automation, it'll automatically show up. And you say, now with your new role, you are going to have some new training courses we want you to go through. When you log into your portal, you'll see those new courses available. And lastly is the tracking. And I think this one gets overlooked quite a bit when you're talking about training and compliance, and risk assessment and things of that nature. Your managers get to see the progress and the completion reports of what your training is doing. You get to see how employees are performing, and you can set baselines and KPIs to say, all right, this person, scored so-and-so on this. We need to go dive a little bit deeper. And that's where you can bring the manual training into play. Let your automation and your portal do everything that it needs to do, kind of that low value, heavy lifting from the beginning. But then once you know some deficiencies in some of that training, that's where somebody can come in and say, hey, I know there are a couple of areas you seem to be struggling with. I want to take you to the shop floor and I want to walk you through this, or I want to get you on that piece of equipment and go just a little bit deeper with you. That way you can really maximize your training. It needs to be human involvement. But that's when it's a high value purpose for your HR or your operations team, is when they can identify some areas that you need to go a little bit deeper, but all the automation will take care of all of those other things and get the base and the foundation in place and take care of the monotonous things that you don't need a person to intervene with. But then you throw in with the tracking and everything else, you can see, one, are they actually doing the training like they're supposed to? They have to hit milestones and complete some of the areas of it. And then they have to go through an assessment. Now, if they pass the assessment and the assessment's built properly, then they're ready to go. But you've got some benchmarks and milestones and things like that in there with your tracking to make sure that you're training properly. And those type of things also can go into your insurance audits and into your processes, that when people are looking at your company from an investment standpoint, from a risk standpoint, all of those elements, you can say, wow, these guys have an amazing onboarding system. When they hire somebody, they've got a process and they are ready to go. And we don't have a gap when somebody leaves and we got to replace them, or we got to expand and scale. We don't have a gap in capabilities because our hiring process and our onboarding process has a solid system in place. Ultimately, this framework is going to create consistency while saving hundreds of hours. And for our finance people, it's going to save a lot of money. I can't put a number on it because it does vary from one company to the next. But if you consider how much an HR staff, for instance, costs you per hour, you can start putting some dollar figures to write that in your head immediately. But if you start talking about compliance and safety and regulation and your insurance costs, you can really start compounding the financial savings that you get on top of the hours that you're going to get back from a lot of your team. So let's talk about what this looks like in practice. Because here's the thing, it's not just theory. This is a system that you can roll out immediately. And this is where I'm going to take you through one of our examples. So let me bring up the portal here. This is a system that we're actually in the process of working on and rolling out. And so I wanted to start here where you see that, in order to access this information, each of your employees and every user that has access to this needs to be behind a login and have a safe, secure environment to be able to get into it and access that information. And so we're going to go ahead and log in here. And I'm just going to take you through a little bit of the information in this portal, but this is an internal portal. You can still see some placeholder information. It's in progress, but it's kind of give you an idea. This is a place where the employees can come, and we'll go into the training here in just a second, but there's some leadership messages and podcasts from the company. There's a company store where you can get, uniforms and say, branded gear and things of that nature. All of this is within this portal, so you get a self-service opportunity for your employees. Now let's look at what this would look like. And this, it's pretty built out. There's a lot of content in this portal. Your portal doesn't have to be as big, or it can be even bigger, but you can really start to drill down, and you can see where a lot of the different areas are. It's like we've got HR and payroll, so you'd have different links and things like that are available there. Accounting, like I'm saying, based on the role that you have for that employee, they may not even see all of these things. They may only see 3 or 4 things. But for today, we're going to go into our operations. We're actually working with a new concrete employee. And you can see the different categories and things like, we're really building out the training for this particular company to where everything that a person needs to know in the entire process. You see the portal approvals, field management app, foreman meetings, like how they should run, all of those kind of things. All of this is in the portal, and it just keeps going. But we're going to go into duties and responsibilities here. And this is, as in, you can see the different layouts that are available, and really these can be built out to whatever's appropriate to your company. And that's why I say, you take that first framework, and then you've got to drill into the details of, based on this is what we need to achieve. This is exactly what we need for our training. And you can start small, and any of these portals and things that you create should be able to expand and grow with your training offerings. So you could start out with, say, just 3 or 4 categories, and then grow into something this large. But for our concrete person, they go in here and say, I really want to understand all of the things that I need to know. Within this category, these are actual individual courses. And you can see where they're enrolled. There's little labels that you can use, and things of that nature. But ultimately, we're giving them all of the training within a course format. And now I'm going to hit continue study just to kind of show you a brief. This one's very simple, still has a little bit of some basic, layout. But there's just like 3 lessons in here. And within these lessons, you can have topics and videos. And then you can have a quiz and assessment and those kind of things. And so, this can really be built in any kind of way that you want. You can see there's a progress bar here. So there's components that your user can see how far along I am with it. And then they've got the main portals and all of those components. And so ultimately, a system like this allows you to go back to our presentation here, but ultimately a system like this allows you to take all of those low value tasks, repeated tasks that your HR team and then your operations team and all of that can go into a portal. It's done one time, and it can be used over and over for every new hire, and every new hire is getting the same training. They're going through the same videos, the same topics, the same things to read, the same assessments, and then you have comparisons across the board too. You can say, "Hey, how's our training doing? Oh, it's doing great. John, he trains everybody. He's the best trainer we got, and he trains them all. Is he doing it the same way every single time? Maybe so. Maybe you've built that and you don't need a portal. That's highly unlikely. But even if you're doing that, what happens if John leaves? Now we're going to lose all of our consistent training. With a portal, it happens the same way every single time, and you're saving time, you're saving money, and you're building a consistent system so everybody's trained the same way. So you send somebody out to a job, or you expect somebody to hit the floor, in the manufacturing process and say, well, you're a new hire in this position. I know you've been through our training. You should know how all of these things work. There's some experience for them to get within your company, but they have the knowledge that you need them to have. And then you're also not wasting time, fixing issues and training over and over because you've had consistent training and you've given them all the tools and assets and the knowledge they need to perform well in the company. And it also lowers a lot of that turnover because they know how to do the job, they know what's expected of the job, and they're ready to do it. People, they go to a job because they know that there's a job to be done. They want to do the job well and they want to do it right. They need to know how to do that. And when they don't is when they start to feel uncomfortable, uneasy. Am I doing it right? I don't know. I don't know if I really like this role. Why is it? Well, because they don't know what to do. Consistent training like this will allow them to really get into the job and know exactly what they're supposed to be doing. So where can you save hundreds of hours and a lot of money? So every company has hidden training inefficiencies. Every single one. If you don't have a centralized portal in a process like this, there's inefficiencies that exist in your company. The great thing is the only way to know is what's costing you time and money is with a diagnostic audit. And this is actually something that Blue Atlas offers as an opportunity. So if you're sitting there saying, I know I've got some issues, I don't even know where to start. That's what this is for. The Revenue and ROI Blueprint. It's a paid audit. So we take all of our team and we dive into your entire company and look at your full HR and operations process, review that and see what you have in place and immediately start identifying gaps and ROI forecast for time savings and efficiency. How can we make this work better? How can we put something like this in place? Where are some low-hanging fruit that we can immediately put in place to save you a bunch of time and money before we even get into a type of portal or something of that nature? And then we roadmap that portal setup and integration. What does it look like? What does your portal need to have in it? What does it need to be? What are the different components? What are regulations and compliance things should we incorporate? And then we map out how to do that integration. What's the process going to be? Because I know a lot of companies go, well, this sounds great, but man, this is going to be a nightmare to implement. We can't do something like that. And you stop, you freeze because you don't know how to do that. We do these things for companies. So we bring that expertise in this blueprint, say, this is how we're going to implement it. We'll implement slow, ramp it up. Once everybody's comfortable, then we move into the next step and to move into phase 2 and so on. All of that's part of your blueprint audit. If you take this and say, hey, I did the audit, I see what our roadmap is, and I'm ready to go ahead and build a portal, we literally take this money that you spent on the audit and put it towards the cost of your portal. So if this is something you're like, yes, I need a portal, but I don't know where to start, you're going to be able to take this money and put it straight into that as we move this forward and get a program and a system in place for you. The thing is, if you're serious about cutting training time and standardize your onboarding, the next step really is a blueprint. No matter what you want to do, you need to incorporate that blueprint to know exactly what needs to go into it. You can't just say, all right, go build me a portal. Like, we need to have that blueprint and roadmap. That way you, your team, and everybody involved knows exactly what's going on. It works just like the training portal. When you've got that roadmap and that consistency, everyone's involved, everybody's happy. You reduce the nervousness and the anxiousness of rolling something like this out. It's only $1,500 to do that complete audit. Our team spends a lot of hours to really identify everything that's part of the process so that you have a complete overview and system ready to go. And then we move forward on a portal or any of our growth systems and projects. We'll credit that money towards that as well. Now, I know there's a lot of people saying, well, I don't know if I'm ready for full diagnostic. Here's the thing. We can do a free audit. It's a 15-minute check, kind of identify some of those high-level, immediate, low-hanging fruits that, are part of our paid audit. Immediately we'll identify these things so that some you can do tomorrow to start saving some money. And that little piece of it is what we actually offer in this free audit. If you kind of, say, well, I don't know if they're the right fit. I don't know if this is the best thing for me. It's a 15-minute check on your training onboarding process. Doesn't take a whole lot of time with the discovery to get this going. And you're going to enroll with at least one major actionable improvement to save time immediately. Typically, it's just 3 to 4 tasks that we provide. And then it shows if a full blueprint makes sense. When you look at it and be like, I think I've got a really good system, but I just want you to take a look at it. This might be the place to start. If you don't have a system in place, I can guarantee the full blueprint is really where you should start. But the thing is, we only do 10 of the full paid blueprints each month because it takes a lot of time from our team. We want everybody invested in it. We don't really want our team bouncing from a whole lot of different things and being distracted. I want them to focus. I want all of us to focus on really analyzing your system and building the best roadmap. But even our free audits are very limited. And so if you're interested in signing up for the audit, you can go to blueatlasmarketing.com blueprint. The thing is, every month you wait is more money that you are wasting. And let me put this up here for everybody on the call with us here. And in the chat section, you can see the revenue and ROI blueprint special offer. You can click the button in the chat, go straight into the landing page. But this blueatlasmarketing.com/blueprint will take you to the same place. Has a real full explanation of everything that's going to happen in that audit and in that process, all the deliverables and everything else. You get a real good feel for what exactly we do in that process, more than the information I've shared today, give you a lot more details. And then you can sign up right there on the spot and go ahead and book a time to get that kickoff call set up. And so ultimately, hope you've really enjoyed a lot of the content today. But our recommendations are these centralized portals because it saves time, saves money, builds consistency, reduces risk. And like I said at the very beginning, it really checks a lot of boxes that a lot of companies, when we talk to, haven't even thought about it. They don't even think about the safety and risk that comes from an inefficient and poor training system. They don't think about the time wasted when you're trying to onboard somebody and say, well, it takes them 3 to 6 months to get up to speed. It's because you don't have a training process in place. There's still going to be experience they need to get, but you can really reduce that onboarding time before somebody's really comfortable and you're comfortable they can do the job. You can shorten that drastically. And now you can do all that with a centralized portal. So if you're looking for more webinars and want more quality resources information, we run webinars every week. You can go to blueatlasmarketing.com/webinars and see all of our upcoming webinars, register for more content like this, see the information and resources that we're sharing based on the 15 years of experience of Blue Atlas and over 25 years of experience with our leadership team. What we bring to the table for B2B companies and industrial companies, manufacturers. So take a look at that for our future webinars. And thanks for joining us today.